Hello and welcome to our video series on the resurrection of Jesus. In today's segment, we're going to have a look at the second of 5 facts concerning the resurrection of Jesus. So fact number 2, following his crucifixion, Jesus was buried in a tomb by Joseph of Arimathea. This is very significant because it points to the fact that the location of Jesus' burial site was known to the Jew and Christian alike. In that case, the disciples could never have proclaimed his resurrection in Jerusalem if the tomb had not been empty. But what evidence do we have for the truth of this fact? Firstly, Jesus' burial is supported by the early creed found in Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. This is what the Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, 3-5, and I quote, "For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12." End quote. This passage, scholars believe, is an old creedal formula that early Christians memorized and recited. Paul himself, as he says in verse 3, received it after becoming a Christian. This tradition probably goes back at least to Paul's visit to Jerusalem around AD 36, when he spent about 2 weeks with Cephas and James to fact-check what he received. It thus dates to within 5 years after Jesus' death. Scholars believe so short a time span and such personal contact make it a fact and clearly not a legend. Secondly, the burial narrative is part of a very old source used by Mark in writing his Gospel. The Gospels tend to consist of brief snippets of Jesus' life, which are not always chronologically arranged. But when we come to the passages talking about the suffering and death of Christ, often referred to as the Passion narrative, we do have one chronological, continuous narrative. This suggests that the Passion story was one of Mark's sources of information in writing his Gospel. Now, most scholars think Mark is already the first Gospel, and Mark's source for Jesus' Passion story is of course even older. Comparison of the narratives of the 4 Gospels show that their accounts do not diverge from one another until after the burial. This implies that the burial account was part of the Passion story and thus very early, implying that it could not be a legend but a fact of history. Thirdly, the burial narrative passes the criterion of enemy attestation since it praises one of the members of the Sanhedrin. As a member of the Jewish Sanhedrin that condemned Jesus, Joseph of Arimathea is unlikely to be a Christian invention. There was strong hatred against the Jewish leadership for their role in the condemnation of Jesus, as we see in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 15. It is therefore highly improbable that Christians would invent a member of the Jewish Sanhedrin that condemned Jesus who honors Jesus by giving him a proper burial instead of allowing him to be handed over as a criminal. Finally, the burial narrative is not opposed by any competing burial narratives. If the burial by Joseph of Arimathea were fabricated, then we would expect to find either some historical trace of what actually happened to Jesus' body, or at least some competing legends. But all our sources are unanimous on Jesus' burial by Joseph of Arimathea. For these reasons, the majority of historical Jesus critics believe that Jesus was buried in a tomb by Joseph of Arimathea. According to the late John Robinson of Cambridge University, the burial of Jesus in the tomb is one of the earliest and best attested facts about Jesus. Thank you so much for watching, and God bless you.